On this podcast, you'll find interviews with high-performing, successful individuals in life sciences. On a weekly basis, we cover their proven methods, principles, strategies, and mindsets to implement new technologies that scale to meet the needs of people in our world.
Welcome to this episode of Life Science Success. For those of you who don't know me, my name is Don and I'm a consultant in life sciences, and I help companies overall focus in on operational excellence. I help companies do a lot of different things with Lean, Six Sigma, value stream mapping, and a variety of things with staffing and things like that. For more information, you can go to my website, www.5280lsc.com. So with that, let me bring in my guest. My guest today is Dr. Lishan Aklog. Dr. Aklog is the CEO of Lucid Diagnostics. He's also the co-founded and served as chairman and chief executive officer of Lucid's parent company, PAVmed, and they're on the Nasdaq, located at PAVM, since its inception in 2014, and as an executive chairman of PAVmed's other major subsidiary, digital health company, Veris Health, since its inception. So with that, welcome, Dr. Aklog.
Thanks, Don. It's great to be here.
Yeah, would you mind taking just a moment and telling listeners a little bit about yourself?
Sure. So in a prior life, I was a heart surgeon, a cardiothoracic surgeon. I trained in Boston and served in academic cardiac surgery for many years. But a key part of my career was that going back even to when I was a resident a long time ago in the mid 90s, I always had a strong interest in innovation, and particularly in technologic innovation. So even when I was a practicing surgeon, I was always the one that, member of the team who tried new technologies when they became available, whether it was robotics or other tools that were available. I was quite focused on that throughout my career. And so as such, I had a lot of interaction with the medical device industry, serving as consultant for larger companies and small. And in the early 2000s, mid 2000s, a couple of partners of mine, another heart surgeon and a longtime colleague from industry, decided not just to work and consult with companies, but we had some of our own ideas and our own innovations that we decided to pursue. So there was about a 5-year period where I was a full-time heart surgeon. At this point, I was in Arizona, while me and my colleagues started essentially a holding company that spun off several medical venture-backed medical device companies, and we were successful in getting 3 products on the market, and we eventually sold one of them, Vortex Medical, which was based on an invention that I had that was based on my experience as a heart surgeon to suck out clots and other large material from the body without having to do open surgery. And so we sold that company, Vortex Medical, and its device AngioVac, to AngioDynamics in 2012. Really proud since then. Tens of thousands of patients have benefited from that technology. And I really kind of learned that there was an opportunity to have an impact doing medical device innovation and entrepreneurship, very similar to the satisfaction you get with operating on individual patients and life-saving surgery. So me and Brian de Guzman, my partner, decided to hang up our scalpels in 2012 and decide to pursue this full time. So that's when we decided to found PAVmed as a vehicle for our entrepreneurial efforts moving forward.
Yeah, it's interesting to me that there are quite a few people that sort of, go down this pathway of, hey, look, I initially want to be a surgeon and I'd like to be close to the patients, and then sort of almost fall into entrepreneurship. And for a variety of reasons, you said hang up your scalpel. I was thinking hang up your scrubs, but similar sort of thought process. But yeah, I am interested in hearing just a little bit more about, do you ever miss being, at the operating table, or do you still get, just as much joy with what you do with the companies that you work with?
Those are sort of two related questions. I think my snarky answer to that is I miss 49% of
Okay.
it. So I do very much enjoy what I'm doing now. As I said, having the impact on a larger scale, but similar in terms of how we impact patients is very gratifying. To see. I mean, our technology, AngioVac, has now essentially become standard of care for one particular application of patients who have infections of their tricuspid valve. So all of that is extremely satisfying, and I enjoy what I'm doing. I do miss interacting with patients. Surgery was very gratifying. The actual physical act of operating was very gratifying. But I mostly miss interacting with patients directly because I enjoyed being a doctor as much as being a surgeon. I very took my to the privilege of interacting with patients, and I saw, surgery is not just sort of a technical exercise, but an exercise in patient care. And so I do miss that. There are a lot of things I don't miss. I don't miss sort of some of the mechanics of practice building and how our system is not very much inclined to um, do sort of obvious things which people would think about, which is that how you build a practice and how you get referrals being driven by using cutting edge technologies and having good outcomes and so forth. There's a lot of other kind of backslapping, golf club dinners kind of things. That side of it is a little bit of a dirty little secret of medicine. I don't miss any of that at all.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's something that, I just think for the science of it too, that being closer to the operating table and understanding kind of, more of the ins and outs of what people will go through to use the devices that you're now creating, it has to
Yeah.
also be an advantage for you.
Correct. Yeah, and again, I wouldn't do anything differently. I mean, even though this
Mhm.
is where I ended up, and it's the pathway is, just a fascinatingly, interesting path I've taken to get to this point. I would do it exactly the same all over again because I think one of the advantages that myself and Brian Guzman, my partner, have is that we have, I think we have a really good knack for combining a clinical perspective with a commercial one. A lot of physician innovators takes them a while to understand the distinction between really interesting science project or an interesting innovation in terms of like a surgical technique or something, as opposed to understanding the intersection between those things, obviously good science and the technical aspects of surgery with what it takes to get a commercial product to the market so that patients and physicians can benefit from that new technology. And there are a lot of nuances that take some, to understand how to do that effectively is takes a certain skill. And I think that's one of the things that's been fun about it, which is leveraging our clinical experience to provide that insight into what are the unmet needs, how would physicians look at a new technology, what are the obstacles from the point of view of the dynamics of a hospital and getting things in the technology transfer offices and the technology committees that have to
Mhm.
sign off and so forth. There's a lot that goes into actually taking what's a good idea and a good product and making it commercially successful.
And I feel like a lot of entrepreneurs that I sort of work with routinely are sort of stuck on the future of what it could be, um,
Correct.
and more of the science and the glamour around that versus the story that kind of gets somebody to that point. And I feel like, according to your story, it sounds to me like you've sort of experienced all of those aspects, right? Bringing a technology to market is not something that's easy by far, and it's something that you have to sort of be able to weave all the pieces together.
Yeah, you have to reset your mindset. A lot of medicine, particularly like, people at sort of fancy pants academic institutions like I was at, there's a lot of the glory, they're driven to some degree by that. I don't mean that in a overly negative way, but the kind of the glory and the stature of, being on a podium and being in, the committees of the major organizations and sort of all of that. And none of that's really useful. Honestly, you have to sort of check all of that at the door when it comes to just the nitty gritty of commercial success. And I do find people tend to get caught up in like, how many patents do I have? How, and things like that, just, sort of analogous to how many publications do I have, as opposed to, you know, just grinding through a first generation product, one that addresses the unmet need, and then doing iterative development to improve it over time. That's a very different process in many ways than the things that the frame of mind of the psychology that physicians tend to operate under, and the things that drive success in the practice of medicine.
So let's talk a little bit about JP Morgan and kind of your trip to JP Morgan. In terms of the things that you're looking forward to having happen, during the week, and what sort of outcomes are you looking for?
I mean, JP Morgan is a very obviously intense experience, right? There's, it's an incredible, opportunity where everybody really from every corner of the life science industry sort of congregates around Union Square in San Francisco and the environs. And so it's a bit intense and can be intimidating, particularly for people who are just getting into the industry or who remain smaller companies like we do, where some of the focus is on, the larger companies. But there's a real opportunity for everybody to be physically together and to make connections. And, in the post-COVID era, we think of, that some of that may be superfluous. And we do, a lot of, like, for example, in terms of investor outreach and roadshows and things like that, a lot of that has become virtual. And so the idea of being in a room and sort of setting up with meetings with investors and so forth may seem a bit old-fashioned. But what I find, the reason I'm going this year is that there are, and sure, you can do that in terms of the investor engagement, sort of the concrete, let me present you, my company's investment thesis and see if you might want to do that. But I find, and what we're planning for this year is a bit more of the networking, public relations, being on panels, having an opportunity for us to, create some visibility for our company in the context of not sort of one-on-one meetings so much with investors, but being on panels and so forth, where there's participating in dialogues around the future of healthcare and medicine and the life sciences industry more broadly. And that's actually a bit different than the previous years I've attended, where it's just been a bit more of a traditional, investor relations exercise, which is, some of that has been usurped by just having remote roadshows. So I'm really looking forward to some of the events that my team and I have organized for this coming meeting.
Very good. Now, can you tell me a little bit more about Lucid Diagnostics? So, I did some research on the company, and as somebody that is younger, that's dealing with acid reflux and things like that, your diagnostic sounds like something at some point in my life that I may unfortunately have to go through. But it does sound very interesting. So yeah.
Let's start kind of at the high level, which is that,
Good.
Obviously cancer across the board is awful, right? It's still a scourge on our society. A lot of great progress has been made in treating cancer over really remarkable progress in my medical career over the last 10 years with new therapies and so forth. But at the end of the day, you need to, the goal is to prevent cancer, right? And we don't do a lot of that. Even though we talk about cancer prevention a lot, we don't really do a lot of cancer prevention. Most of the programs that we have that have been wildly successful at preventing cancer deaths have been early cancer detection, and that's great. Women get mammograms that's been proven to prevent cancer deaths, but not prevent cancer. Similar with other scanning in smokers for lung cancer and a whole variety. There really are very few actual tests that can prevent cancer. One of them is colonoscopy, because we pick up polyps and we snip out the polyps and prevent them from developing into cancer. Another one is cervical cancer, where Pap testing can pick up early stage changes well before they develop into cancer. That's about it. Talk about sort of a couple of dozen cancers that are out there. Those are about the only two that I could think of where we're actually preventing it. And that's what's exciting about Lucid and our product, our test EsoGuard, which is that we're dealing with one of the most deadly cancers and underserved cancers you can imagine. That's esophageal cancer. It's just gruesome. It's really a horrible, tragic cancer. It happens about 16,000 times a year. 16,000 people die a year from it. It's the second highest mortality rate of any cancer. It's essentially a death sentence. About 80% of people die upon within 5 years of diagnosis. I mean, those are, unheard of in breast and colon, where we do reasonably well. People still, succumb to it, but our cure rates, particularly in the early stage, are high. The challenge with esophageal cancer is that even if you pick it up in stage 1, right? So you get a mammogram. Women gets a mammogram. They pick it up early. They do the appropriate surgical and/or a medical treatment, and the cure rates are 90+%. Same with stage 1 colon cancer. Same with most stage 1 cancers. Esophageal cancer is the one exception where even at stage 1, you have a 50% mortality. So wow. you can't just say we're going to go pick up esophageal cancer and feel like you have an impact. You're just not. That's not a victory to pick up stage 1 cancer. So that presents a huge challenge biologically to say, well, how can we prevent esophageal cancer? And the way we can prevent it is, first of all, knowing what the population of patients who actually is at risk for that. And that's actually very well established. You hinted at one risk factor, which is chronic heartburn. Most people don't realize that, we all know about heartburn. We see ads on TV for Prilosec and all this, we know about that, right? It's common layperson understanding, but very few understand that there's a link between chronic heartburn and esophageal cancer. And we also know the risk factors: age, gender, race, family history, things like that are very well established. And we also know that if you pick up the precancerous conditions, that you can prevent cancer. So if you pick it up early enough, if it's really early precancer, you can monitor it over time and see if it progresses to the later precancers. The later stage precancers can be treated with a simple endoscopic procedure that allows you to eliminate the abnormal cells and prevent them from going to cancer. So all of those elements of being able to use precancer detection to prevent cancer, all of those are in place. The problem is that no one gets screened. Despite the guidelines, historically, it's like 5%. No, certainly no more than 10%. And that's the tragedy. It's a preventable cancer. If you would just identify people, all the other elements of a really good early detection program are available. And that's where EsoGuard comes in. So EsoGuard allows us to take this population of patients where we know they have about a 10% chance of having this precancer, testing them using a non-invasive, just 2 minutes in an office setting. You swallow this little capsule that collects cells from your lower esophagus, and those go to this very sophisticated molecular diagnostic test using the latest molecular techniques, and you get a positive or negative answer. And if it's positive, then that's followed up with an endoscopy, and you can determine where the patient is and put them on the appropriate surveillance or treatment regimen and prevent cancer. And if it's negative, then their risk is low, and you follow them over the years. And so this is a huge deal, and not just for esophageal cancer, but just in general in the early detection paradigm that we're talking about, where here's an actual example of an opportunity to prevent cancer. Which they're very few and far between, and we're super excited about it. We're grateful to the scientists who developed this from Case Western. We're grateful to the government funding, the National Cancer Institute that led to the development of this, and we're grateful to have had the opportunity the last 5 years to bring it to market for the benefit of patients.
Yeah, it just sounds to me like a very interesting technology for probably a not very widely known problem. And then my understanding is the test is actually an LDT, correct? So probably only certain places can run the test. Is that how it operates?
Well, the way
at one lab?
Yeah, let me jump in on that. So you mentioned that it's a laboratory developed test. We used that pathway as an entry point, right? That to be able to get on the market, get experience with it, collect the additional data that we need to get payers and others to understand its clinical utility and value. And it's all through a central laboratory. So we have our own laboratory. I'm here in Orange County right now. We have a laboratory in Lake Forest that is a CLIA certified laboratory. And all of the samples from patients who are getting their cells sampled all over the country get sent to our central location where it undergoes this molecular diagnostic test under the LDT umbrella. We have always had a plan to do additional clinical validity studies to be able to submit for FDA approval. But for the time being, the LDT pathway has been a great entry point for us to get this on the market and, for the benefit of patients and to collect the necessary data to advance it through the commercial process.
I think it's common for most diagnostics today, especially if they're more sophisticated technologies. If it's anything that essentially is developed, it's just a common pathway for it to go through the LDT pathway first, and be run somewhere outside of New York, because New York, I understand, has the most sophisticated
Although we have a New
tools
York
for
license,
CLIA.
so even though our lab is in California, we went through all the higher
Oh
bar.
my.
We can test patients from New York, so it's worked out just fine.
That's perfect. Yeah, and I'm glad that you clarified that as well. So, throughout your career, what have been some of the most challenging moments, and how did you overcome them?
Yeah, I think the biggest challenge really in bringing great technology to the market to the benefit of patients and physicians is raising capital. I mean, I don't think there's anything harder, anything that's a bigger obstacle to that. There is great technology out there. We found this technology it was introduced to us from a university that had developed this. There are physician key opinion leaders and advocates, and putting together a team to develop a commercial strategy. None of that is straightforward. I mean, there's obviously challenges along the way, and I'll include that as sort of a second challenge. But first and foremost is be able to raise capital, right? And the capital markets are, sometimes there's money flowing, chasing speculative life sciences technologies, and there's times like now where the bar is quite a bit higher, and what you have to demonstrate to drive investment is a more sort of concrete pathway to profitability and revenue and so forth. And we've been really fortunate that during the early periods when we would have been still considered sort of a speculative play, where we didn't have yet a pathway to commercialization. We hadn't demonstrated a whole variety of things that would be considered investment risks in terms of regulatory or IP or physician adoption pathways, things like that. We had access to capital, and we used the public markets effectively, both PAVmed at the parent level, and then Lucid went public as a subsidiary on its own 2 years ago in 2021 and raised $70 million. So between PAVmed and Lucid, we've raised over $300 million in the public markets, and so we've had real, great access to capital. Fortunately, in this current environment, with interest rates up and small companies a bit beaten down and the bar being a bit higher, we've been fortunate as well, even in this tough market, in that we're in a good position. We have, Lucid is really pretty thoroughly de-risked down to kind of the last mile, which is getting predictable and reliable, particularly commercial payer coverage, something we're working hard on, we're making steady progress on. And so because of that, and because of our track record, we've been able to continue to raise capital in a tough market. And we're close to having sufficient capital to get us to cash flow positive in a couple of years. So we've been fortunate in that regard, but that's been a big challenge. The second big challenge, of course, is developing a commercial strategy, which we're really proud of. You can't just simply take a template and say, okay, we're going to hire a bunch of reps and they're going to go talk to doctors and doctors are going to use it, right? You have to be creative. And I've been really proud of our team. We have multiple ways we get patients access to this technology. We have reps on the ground who call on primary care physicians. We figured out a way for the patients to get the cell collection procedure using our own clinicians. We hired our own team of nurse practitioners, which is very unusual in the diagnostic space. They've become experts at administering this device and collecting the cells. They basically go out across and park themselves at practices and connect with physician practices where they can actually do the cell collection procedure, sort of like a phlebotomist would be at a practice. So all of that's very creative, pathways and channels that we've developed. We're doing health fair type events. We call them check your food tube events. They've been mostly at firehouses, where we know that firefighters have an increased risk of esophageal cancer, substantially increased risk. And so we've been working with fire departments to do large scale screening. Our first event, we tested 400 patients over 2 weekends. And now we're diving into employers and offering our test as a direct benefit to where employers can offer it as a direct benefit to their employees through their health and wellness program. So separate from the traditional payer pathways, where you contract directly with an employer and offer and let them. We had our first contract earlier this fall, and we're actually in the process of testing a bunch of patients at our first employer contract. So that's all requires a lot of creative thinking and requires a lot of sort of from the bottom up. Our team is most of those initiatives came from the team, not from a top down approach. And we've been, we've set up our company so that we can pounce on those and so forth. So those are challenging, but those are the fun challenges. Raising capital is a little bit more, gives you a few gray hairs here and there. But worked out well.
Yeah, it's hard for sure. Raising capital at times, you sort of have to scratch your head and go, I don't understand the decision here. You have to respect it. You don't get a choice either way. But at the same time, it's one of those things where you got to go, okay, so I'm gonna sort of dust myself off and go figure out how to go approach this again. Over and over again. It's really an interesting process to having gone through. So. But yeah.
Yep, no question. Yeah, and you have to be able to tell your story and tell your story well to the folks, and people are making a bet on you and your team. Sure, they're betting on the technology, but at the end of the day, you have to give people confidence in you and your team, and ask them to make a bet on, because they can bet on a lot of things, and it's everyone's hard-earned money. So if you look at that, with some degree of respect for that, where investors come from, and tell your story as to why you think. Partnering with them would be, advantageous and would pay off in the long run. But it's all about storytelling. I've learned that. I joke that my primary job is writing press releases and telling our story while everybody else is kind of doing the actual nitty-gritty work. A little bit of an exaggeration, but I do feel like that's such a critical part of our success, is being able to tell our story correctly.
So, in terms of the next big steps, for Lucid and the progress going forward, what do you sort of envision, for the company, and what can we look forward to?
Yeah, as I said, everything now is about coverage and getting paid. So we're getting paid. We have much better activity with our revenue cycle manager, where we get out of network payments, and that's been steady and growing, and that's a nice baseline. But at the end of the day, to get patients access and therefore be able to translate what's been really solid test volume growth into revenue and revenue growth, we have to really engage with payers on medical policy and make our case that this test should be covered under their medical policy. And what that requires is, first of all, having a great team. We've really built up a great team on the clinical research side with our chief medical officer. We've added some new personnel on market access, and so all of those pieces are in place. And you simply engage and try to make the case that this is, you argue the healthcare economics, you argue the benefit to their patients, and you build a data set. And so one of the things that we're very excited about over the last quarter, which goes to your point of what's up and coming, it's leveraging the data that we've just put together in clinical utility to show payers that this test has a impact on medical decision making. That it's not just we're ordering a test and you're paying for it, it's that we're ordering it, that the physician's ordering a test and they're using that information in the appropriate way. So we've documented in 3 studies that have all been posted and are heading towards publication, that physicians actually use it. We got nearly 100% concordance. So if there's a positive test, patients actually get appropriately referred for an endoscopy. And if the test is negative, they don't get an unnecessary endoscopy. And payers want to know that. They don't want to pay for a test that, where the patient's going to get an expensive and invasive follow-up regardless, right? They want to know that test had a bifurcated sort of impact, fork in the road impact on care. So we're armed with all of that. We didn't have that 6 months ago. We had hardly any, and now we do. And so this year is all about leveraging that data, getting engaged in pilot programs and coverage with evidence development, and a whole variety of pathways that you have to get private payer coverage, and then ultimately Medicare coverage as well. And once we do that, we know we can put our foot on the gas and drive test volume. Right now, we're kind of in a mid throttle. We're doing just enough to show growth and to have enough activity to generate claims and claims history and go through appeals and have engagements and be able to interact with payers. But once we get to a certain threshold with regard to the number of covered lives we have and we're getting paid on, then the sky's the limit. I mean, there are 30 million patients who are, who should be tested by existing guidelines, the most conservative guidelines, we're just scratching the surface. So we can put our foot on the gas once we feel like we have sufficient coverage to do that.
Well, thank you for sharing that. So now I want to focus a little bit on you towards the end of the interview here. What's the greatest piece of leadership advice that you've ever received, and how has it influenced your approach?
Yeah, I think it's been the advice I've received, and what I would say to anybody else is, it's at the end of the day, it's about your team. There's no individual leader who can, just by force of personality or work or whatever, who can individually drive this. It's a team sport, as they would say, and so the critical aspects of succeeding is just putting together a great team with a great culture, and particularly at the leadership level, the executive leadership team, the sort of half a dozen or a dozen folks who are really tasked with having a fair amount of independent sort of autonomy to go off and act on your behalf and act on behalf of the company. It's just critical that those roles are filled with people who are smarter than you, who have unique experiences, who can look at and be strategic in their thinking and in executing, and can function like a team, right? And I've learned that over the years. I mean, we started with 3 of us, and for a long time we had less than 20 employees, where it was very simple for everybody to just kind of roll up their sleeves, and I would just write half of the SEC filing myself, or look at the financials and so forth, and you sort of get used to that a little bit at the beginning, and then you have to understand that if you're going to scale, you can't do that, and you have to have people that are talented and hardworking and share the same passion for what you're doing, and surround yourself with folks like that at every point, and then get everybody to work together by building a culture for success, and a culture where people are not siloed. Everybody works together and contributes their part. So I think that's pretty much at the heart of things. I mean, there are probably a whole variety of other platitudes that I could come with, but it's fairly simple. At the end of the day, your success is based on the team that you build.
Yeah, it's interesting because there was a conversation I had the other day with a CEO where he was saying that they are on their third COO, so the third operations leader in the company. And all I kept thinking was, one, I mean, to me, the operations leader, I mean, being an operations leader myself, the operations leader role is just so critical.
Yeah.
And to lose, those core skill sets and not sort of, be progressing the company, just maybe question sort of the parameters, the role, the leadership, in general, sort of the team dynamics. I mean, I had all sort of questions, that I could have followed up with, but I sort of, let it go for now. But I'll be working closer with them, in the future. But I just sort of think about that critical role and losing somebody so close to execution.
I think it's a bit of a red flag. I mean, we've had some turnover, but generally that's just us learning what the role should be. It's a learning. There's definitely a learning experience as you build a team. If there's a lot of turnover in one spot, there's probably a problem. But having some turnover and understanding, what we really need for this role is somebody with a little bit different experience and so forth. And often those become sort of a mutual understanding. One of the things I'm really proud of is we've expanded our senior ranks a substantial amount in the past 18 months, and essentially every one of our new hires in a variety of different areas: regulatory, market access, chief medical officer, and so forth. None of them were looking for jobs, and they were people that we recruited from existing jobs where they were satisfied, and they bought into our culture and our mission and our values, and it's worked out great. And so that to me is a bit of a point of pride and a sign that we're probably doing something right in building this team.
Yeah, so important. My last three questions are questions that I ask of every guest. What inspires you?
What inspires me are really patience. I don't think I would have the same perspective on what I do today if I hadn't spent 10 years, 4 years in medical school, 10 years training to be a heart surgeon, and about 12, 13 years in practice. I saw every day, over those 20 plus years, the courage of patients to overcome, very difficult pain, circumstances, stress, just an enormous amount of disruption in their lives. And so, I tell my team all the time that we are privileged. Nothing wrong with working for a company that makes widgets of some kind, and there's nothing wrong with that. That's perfectly fine. But we're just not to be snooty about that, but we have a privilege of the work that we do and the hard work that everybody puts in actually having an impact on patients and patients' lives. And I think it's as straightforward as that. That's the primary driver for us. And being a successful company, obviously you have to be successful commercially. We have obviously an obligation to a variety of constituents to do that, but that's necessary to have the impact. The breadth of your impact that you can have on patients is directly related to your commercial success. So they're the same goal, but the inspiration arises from having that, being able to have an impact on people's lives.
Absolutely. What concerns you?
Concerns me is the landscape. Everybody. You can build a great team. You can have great assets. You can have a clear path, a good strategy. And there are, external factors that can come into play that, markets can shift, access to capital can shift. There can be regulatory changes. You mentioned the LDT path, for example. There was a little bit of concern a couple of months ago when the FDA put out a new rule, and it's a little bit of we're like, wow, how's it going to affect us? And we did the analysis, and we're fine. We actually think it may be a positive for us and sort of a barrier to entry. And so, that is part of. It's a bit lonely at the top, right? Because that's my job is to worry about. I use the metaphor like we're the asteroid coming in and coming in after there's just stuff that comes in out of left field, and you sort of are always looking out for for potential external factors that can frustrate very carefully designed and executed plans by a great team. And we feel fortunate that we've been able to weather all those storms, and we've part of that is just keeping being aware of things and having an open eye and looking for opportunities and challenges as they come. But yeah, that's part of my job is to watch out for those things and to be concerned about those things.
I feel like as the CEO, you've got to have some sort of radio telescope somewhere, looking for asteroids all the time.
Eyes behind you, on the back of your head and on the sides, and always looking out, because you do feel sort of protective of your team. That at the end of the day, you said maybe I should embellish one of the things, add something to what inspires you. Obviously the final goal and mission is about patients, but what inspires me is my team. It's a little bit like every day, my primary focus is to make sure that we do well by our team, that we give them the time, the resources, and the opportunity for their hard work and commitment to succeed. And honestly, that's my kind of like my immediate goal and inspiration, is that I'm so inspired by our great team that I feel an incredible obligation to make sure that they have the resources they need to be successful. And so yeah, it's one of my responsibilities to make sure that they do.
Absolutely. Last question: what excites you?
Technology, science. I mean, the things, the ability to leverage incredible progress in science and technology to the benefit of patients is exciting. I mean, I read Nature every week, which is a little weird because I'm not really deep in the weeds on a lot of that science, and a lot of it is sort of over my head. But I just find every the incredible progress that's being made in science. I mean, the science that underpins the EsoGuard test is remarkable. If you think, when I was a medical student, I spent an entire 4 summers sequencing one little piece of mRNA, the one little thing that helps like cells move in a lab at Mass General in Boston. Now, in our lab here, up the street here, we're sequencing tens and thousands of base pair in every day. It's become how we actually do that. It almost feels like magic at times that we can take a few cells from the patient's esophagus in a couple of minutes and process it, extract the DNA and process it in a way that we can literally, measure, abnormalities, and not in mutations, but abnormalities in epigenetic changes on discrete areas of DNA, and do so, thousands of times over. It's almost magical, honestly. I mean, I know how it works, but I just find it really exciting. And there are it's just science is just pushing forward, and there are lots of opportunities to leverage technology and science to the benefit of patients.
Yeah, I've said that before on other podcasts as well. I feel like in terms of science, this is like one of the greatest times to be alive, because not only do you sort of get to experience science, but you also get to understand a little bit more about why certain things work. And I was recently asked, what are the things that, sort of cause me to want to, be inspired by science? And that's it. I mean, it's that spark, and seeing that spark turn on, for people that all of a sudden know that not only the reason why something happened is because of the science around it, but also we can design that to happen over and over again. I mean, that to me is absolutely amazing. And
think of this week. I mean, this week we have for the first time, a gene editing technology to treat and cure sickle cell disease. I mean, this week. And that's because of just incredibly, things we have to be careful with, their potential dangers and so forth, but the payoff for millions of people who suffer, this horrendous disease that has had very little progress over the years. What an incredible accomplishment. I have a cousin who was diagnosed with stage 4 lung cancer 5 years ago. I was a thoracic surgeon. I operated on people, and it was unheard of. Stage 4 lung cancer was 6 months, and you're done. And that's obviously on the biopharma side, but just incredible, understanding of the immunology of cancer and our ability to intervene, just remarkable. And we have an obligation to figure out ways to take that science and technology and have patients benefit from it.
Thank you for sharing that. And Dr. Aklog, thank you a lot for being on the Life Science Success Podcast. I greatly appreciate you being here and for telling us about Lucid Diagnostics. I wish you all the best, and I hope that you have a great JP Morgan week.
Great. Thanks, Don. Really, thanks for taking the time. Really enjoyed our conversation. So thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to Life Science Success. For complete details about this podcast, including show notes, how to get in touch with guests, and more episodes, please visit www.lifesciencesuccess.com. If there's someone you'd like for us to invite to the show as a guest, please let me know by sending me a message at the podcast website. Please click subscribe on your favorite podcast app, share the podcast, or tell a friend about it, and last but not least, rate the podcast. Thank you again.